Europa is een huis met veel kamers. De Unie verenigt naast 28 lidstaten ook tal van regio's die vaak uiteenlopende belangen hebben. Een van die regio's is Noord-Ierland, dat onderdeel uitmaakt van het Verenigd Koninkrijk. In een gesprek met Actua-TV toont Noord-Iers EU-parlementslid Martina haar visie op Europese identiteit en migratie en toont daarbij duidelijk het eigen gezicht van haar regio.
The European Parliament opened its sitting in Strasbourg by celebrating the Day of Europe. During this ceremony, the Vice President of the Parliament, Rainer Wieland, highlighted that countries that believe to be able to solve their issues on their own are wrong. At the same time, he stated, such a day where we have an open door is a great opportunity for people from different countries to come together and cement the European idea. The last Tuesday and during the plenary of the Parliament held in Strasbourg, President Schulz stated, "It is time to fight for Europe," meaning that we need to strengthen what unites us. But under this spirit, how is possible an idea like Brexit to arise? How possible is for a country to make it outside Europe? In the meanwhile, if Europe has opened doors to cement the European idea, how open is indeed that door to refugees? The plenary of this week discussed in Strasbourg, among others, the issue of the tens of thousands of asylum seekers. What have MEPs proposed is to change the Dublin rules that determines which EU country is responsible for processing an asylum application. In particular, MEPs advocated to replace the country of first arrival criteria with a common scheme to ensure that member states take fair shares of asylum seekers. MEPs, the Council and the Commission also discussed possible ways to restore a fully functioning Schengen passport-free area, since Schengen countries have reimposed border checks or temporarily closed their borders. After all, the question is, how close was the plenary to finally appoint a common asylum policy?
Well, all of this will answer for us Mrs. Martina, a member of the European Parliament from the United Kingdom, registered with the Confederal Group of European United Left. Mrs. Anderson, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we celebrated a few days ago the Day of Europe and the European idea, during which the Vice President of the European Parliament, Mr. Wieland, stated that if any countries felt that could solve its issues alone, well, it's wrong, highlighting in the same time that we have open doors to call people from all over Europe, from all over the world, to celebrate the European idea. Well, under this spirit, what do you think about the Brexit idea?
Well, in the first instance, it's important that you realise, as the largest Irish delegation, my party, Sinn Féin, critically engages with the EU. And basically, we will assess every file that passes the 4 Sinn Féin MEPs' desks to ascertain if the people we're here to represent are going to benefit from that file or not. We have what's called a critical engagement with Europe, because there is a democratic deficit in Europe. Of that, there is no doubt. The European Commission has too much power, and we get that. And as Irish MEPs, we are fighting to reform the EU. That said, we are very clear that Ireland's place is in Europe, north and south. And a Brexit would effectively mean that we could end up in Ireland with an EU border right in the heart of Ireland. And that would have devastating effects for the people of Ireland, north and south.
To conclude your words, MEPs in your party are here to change Europe.
Oh, without doubt, we are here to change Europe. We want a social Europe. We want a Europe that was founded after the World War, that talked about international solidarity, engaging with people, looking at regions that needed international support to make sure what happened here during World War II would never happen again. And those values are the values that we sign up to, in that we agree with human rights, consumer rights, environmental rights, all of those rights that protect citizens.
Do you believe that all these a country can solve them outside Europe?
We believe that, without doubt, that they can only be achieved for us in Ireland, in the north of Ireland, inside of Europe. For instance, we in the north of Ireland are a net beneficiary of EU funding. So, whilst you will get other MEPs from Britain and elsewhere who would put a case that Britain makes a net contribution to Europe, and they do. Of that there is no doubt. But for us in the north, we are net beneficiaries, and we benefit to the tune of 3.5 billion. And there is not a mission that if we pulled out as a consequence, or if Britain pulled us out as a consequence of Brexit, the implications of that for economically for the north would be dire. As well as that, Britain is not going to replace that funding. Britain is not going to replace the kind of environmental protections and the standards that we have, the quality of the air that we're breathing, the water that we drink, the food that we eat. Britain will not replace the quality of those standards for the people in the north of Ireland, nor will they replace, for instance, workers who are entitled to, whether it is holiday pay for those that are lucky enough and fortunate enough to have a job, for the workers' rights, for the Working Time Directive, all of the protections that come only from Europe. Britain will not replace any of those protections. And if any evidence was needed to demonstrate what I am saying, look at what it intends to do about the Human Rights Act. The British government has already committed in its manifesto when it was standing for election, and now in government, to repeal, to scrap the Human Rights Act.
Speaking for open doors, how open do you think Europe's door is to refugees, and how close is the present plenary to appoint a common European asylum policy?
Well, that is one of the very reasons when I said to you about what we cherish about the rights and protections that people should have. I think it is absolutely disgracing, appalling, offensive. I find the way that Europe is trying to keep refugees out as opposed to keeping refugees safe. The Mediterranean has turned into a floating cemetery.
This is the reality that we already know, but to this point, is the present plenary close to appoint a common European asylum policy?
Yeah, of course. But that's what you have is such a mixed bag of opinion within the plenary with regards to trying to arrive at a common policy, because we just have to look at the Turkey EU deal that was made, and basically, Turkey does not fulfill the Copenhagen criteria. It doesn't fulfill as a country that should be coming to even to get access to entry into the EU, and yet you have the European Commission and the European Council prepared to do a deal with Turkey in order for them to keep the refugees there, rather than allow for an asylum process to take place, where we know even a report today in The Guardian is outlining how you have refugees who are not being allowed to go through the proper asylum process, and if they were, they would be getting they certainly would be getting their asylum application cleared, and they would be getting access and regarded as people who need to be protected. So when you consider what Europe is doing with Turkey and the EU-Turkey deal, when you consider what they are doing with countries, some of the countries are doing in places like the Middle East, trying to slice and dice, and this is what I'm saying to you about how Europe needs to be reformed. Because you cannot have Turkey in the one hand with all of the refugees that it has on its doorstep, and then on the other, we know from information that has been gathered and evidence that has been presented that ISIS is transporting its oil through Turkey, and that oil is finding itself in European countries.
Mrs. Anderson, I have to sincerely thank you, and thank you all of you. See you next week.